Episode number 161 of the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. Welcome to the Wholesome Fertility Podcast. I'm Michelle, a fertility acupuncturist here to provide you with resources on how to create a wholesome approach to your fertility journey. My guest today is Dr. Amy Divaraniya. Dr. Divaraniya is the CEO and founder of Oova, a women's health company. She has more than 10 years of experience as a data scientist and has both led and published original research in areas of personal genomics and biomarker discovery. Her solid understanding of biology and being able to apply complex analyses have led to innovative projects in the healthcare space. In 2017, Dr. Divaraniya chose to pivot her career as a data scientist and devote herself to improving women's healthcare. After facing her own struggles with conceiving her son, Dr. Divaraniya decided to build a solution to help women having difficulty getting pregnant. Today, she and her team have built the first at-home test, Oova, that measures multiple hormones through urine samples and provides personal results and insights on a woman's fertility. As a response to COVID-19, Oova has done an early release of their product. Oova has resonated with many women and clinicians and is now being adopted by fertility clinics and hospitals across the country. Welcome to the podcast, Amy.
Thanks so much for having me.
So we actually spoke a year ago when you first started Oova, and it was really launching. And it is definitely a great thing because I know with my patients, a lot of people are looking to figure out if they really have ovulated, and most people are just checking LH. So first of all, I'd love for you to tell your story and how you got started with this, and also explain to people why just checking your LH is not confirming that you have ovulated.
Sure. So I guess I'll start with my story and what really drove me to creating Oova. I actually went through my own journey with infertility. I had expected my journey to parenthood to not be simple and wouldn't happen in the first shot. I've had irregular cycles my whole life. I was also a little older when I started trying to conceive. But my husband and I both agreed that we wanted to pursue parenthood naturally. And if it didn't happen that way, we were not going to pursue invasive routes, mostly because, to be honest, I had a mistrust of the medical community when it came to my fertility, because I was misdiagnosed with PCOS multiple times when I was younger. So I was like, if I don't conceive naturally, then my body is telling me that this isn't going to happen, and I don't need a doctor to tell me otherwise. So I started doing everything right. I started peeing on 6. I took my temperature 4:30 a.m. every day. I used every fertility tracking app. And luckily, after 18 months, I did conceive my son. But those 18 months were the most devastating of my life. And the worst part was I didn't learn anything new about my cycle. All I found out was that I had irregular cycles, and I knew that going into my journey. I also realized that all the tools I was using were really hardwired for women who had that perfect 28 to 32-day cycle. And that wasn't me.
Yeah.
So the more I thought about it, I was like, the piece of information really missing from my data set is understanding what my hormones are doing, because that dictates everything in our reproductive systems. And if I had that information, I would have known exactly where I was in my cycle, and I'd know what to do and when to do it. So that's really where the idea for Oova was born. And what I set out to do was figure out a way to really bring a lab into a woman's home. So I wanted to have incredibly accurate results that were sensitive, could be trusted by a doctor, be done non-invasively in real time, and then more importantly, track the hormone levels over time.
Right.
And the key nail in the coffin was that it had to be personalized.
Right.
So I didn't want to compare her data to a standard threshold for that perfect woman that we all know doesn't exist.
Yep.
It'll have to be based on her data. So that's really where Oova was born.
Amazing. And you also have a background with research.
Yeah, so I have a PhD in biomedical sciences with a focus on genetics and genomics. So not really associated with women's health per se, but I am a trained data scientist. So I love data. I love numbers. It comes in super handy. But what's frustrating is that, like, even despite those skills, like, I found myself trying to mine my own data and try to find patterns in all this information I was collecting over my 18 months. And there were no patterns I could detect. I wasn't getting highs. I wasn't getting peaks. I didn't see peak once in the 18 months I was trying to conceive. I saw highs maybe 4 or 5 times. And it's in 18 months, it's hard to believe that I only ovulated 4 or 5 times.
Right. And it's so that's something that I do want to talk about is a lot of times people will just go and get an over the counter basic ovulator predictor kit, OPK. And they have digital ones, they have ones that draw a line, and so then people see that line and think, okay, well, I'm ovulating or should be ovulating. So explain why that doesn't not necessarily predict ovulation or show ovulation.
So the way that the traditional OPKs are set up is there's a hard printed threshold, and when your LH levels surpass that threshold, you get a positive result. Now, the problem resides in that threshold is really determined or defined by women in their early 20s who had perfect 28-day cycles. And it was like defined in that population, that group of 100 or 120 women. That's how that threshold was defined. And that has been our normal for the past 40 years, right? Now women are not trying to get pregnant in their early 20s. They're trying to get pregnant later in life. And you can't necessarily compare yourself to that threshold anymore. So if you have irregular cycles or irregular hormone levels, your LH levels may not always reach that threshold, or if you have a reproductive disorder, they may be consistently above that threshold.
Right.
So this results in false negatives and false positives, respectively, which can be really frustrating for a woman who's trying to conceive because at some point, every single day matters.
Yeah.
And if you start doing the math, you have about 12 chances a year to get pregnant.
Right.
And if you miss that because you're using inaccurate tests, that's like you're just wasting time and money, to be honest.
Right. And it basically only measures what your brain is trying to put out, which is luteinizing hormone, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the ovaries responded.
Exactly. So that's really where having the progesterone is really critical because, yes, the way that this works is estrogen starts to rise. It signals to the brain to start releasing LH, and now your LH starts coming out in little bursts, right? So your body's collecting this LH, and that's why you start to see the surge, right? Because the bursts start coming out faster and faster, and it'll collect, and then eventually it'll hit this peak. And that level is meant to be the signal to your ovary to actually release the egg.
Right.
So now once the egg is released, if an egg is released, it'll start to emit progesterone once the corpus luteum forms, which is the yellowish shell that appears around the egg. So if progesterone is detected in your urine after ovulation, that's an indication that you actually did release an egg that cycle. And what we're seeing with Oova is that, yes, obviously we can confirm that you've ovulated, but we can also actually detect if you've conceived because we'll start to see the progesterone and your LH go back up. The progesterone will stay elevated and the LH starts to go up. But actually what's happening is it's not LH levels staying elevated. It's actually beta HCG.
Right.
It's a pregnancy hormone.
Yeah, so that's an important thing to kind of mention is that sometimes those tests, even an LH test that you buy, just an OPK kit, will look positive if it's detecting HCG.
Yeah, and it makes sense because beta HCG and LH are very similar in shape, the proteins themselves. They only really vary off of one antibody spot. So most of these tests, and like ours, we did a lot of testing for this too. We actually have non-specific binding to beta HCG, and we decided to leave that filter in because it's actually not a negative thing to detect.
Right. So explain how Oova works.
Sure. So it's a pretty simple test. It's a urine-based test. When you order our kit, it comes with 15 disposable cartridges, a handle, and a holder. It works alongside a smartphone app. So when you download the app, you are taken through an extensive onboarding process. You learn a lot about your reproductive history, your general wellness, overall menstrual cycle. We feed that data into our algorithm, and then we determine which 15 days of your cycle you have to use Oova. So you're never guessing. That's why it's really designed for that irregular woman, right? So the woman that has a 28 to 32-day cycle, I believe she has enough solutions available to her. Oova is really designed for the woman who has no clue what's going on.
Right.
On a testing day, the app will indicate that you should use an Oova test. You provide a urine sample on the sample pad, either midstream or as a dip test. You then wait until the timer in the app goes off. It takes 10 minutes. And then it'll open up the camera directly on your phone and you scan the test strip. There's a QR code on the test strip. You align that in the window, and we do all the analytics directly on the phone, so you get your results in seconds.
Right.
I'll tell you exactly what your hormone concentrations are. We also give you a contextualized result, letting you know if you're in low, high peak ovulation, if you've released an egg or not, days post ovulation. And then we give you a daily action plan that is customized to you. So that includes something in nutritional health, physical health, and emotional wellness, because fertility should honestly be looked at holistically. But I know I'm preaching to the choir about that.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, but absolutely, because it really is a reflection of overall health, and we treat overall health, and then fertility health happens.
Yeah, exactly. And then the other key thing is what we realized is that things can't happen in a silo, right? So you can track all this data on your own, understand your cycle, you go to your doctor, and then you can present all this data. But if they don't trust it, they're not really going to do much with that data. So what we've figured out how to do is actually loop the clinician into the entire equation. Mm-hmm. So if you're working with an Oova provider, then you can actually share your results with your doctor in real time. So when you get your results in your app, your doctor gets your hormone levels in their HIPAA compliant Oova dashboard, and they can actually treat you completely remotely, which is a really interesting avenue for the company. And we've been having a lot of fun helping a lot of doctors and patients. Yeah. So we have a lot of patients in our platform that have endometriosis, have PCOS, and because we're a quantitative test, mm-hmm. and we don't compare you to a threshold, we learn what every woman's unique baseline levels are, mm-hmm. and then we detect fluctuations in our hormones by comparing to that. Mm-hmm. So I don't care if your hormone levels are really elevated or really low. Mm-hmm. We figure out what your baseline is, and then we just help understand your cycle from that. So we really work for women of all different types. And what's really been interesting is for women that don't even think they're cycling because they're telling me they're perimenopausal or are still breastfeeding, mm-hmm. we're still able to help them achieve their fertility goal. Right. Our hormones really tell us everything that's happening inside, but all these symptoms that we're trying to understand are just a byproduct of that.
And so what are some of the benefits? I mean, because I know that you talk about very individualized testing, and then you also mentioned giving or providing different suggestions nutritionally. Are those more catered to the testing?
They are catered to the patient or the person using it. So alongside the hormone levels that we're capturing, we also track as many symptoms that a woman wants to track in the app. So she can track anywhere from 1 to 35 different things. All of that data is fed into our algorithm, and it helps us make more customized recommendations. Mm-hmm. And then we also try to time it with where you are in your cycle to make recommendations to avoid symptoms that you may have experienced previously. So we try to be proactive.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
It just takes a couple of cycles for us to get to be really accurate at being proactive about it.
And how does one start? Do they need to get one kit and then they get refills, or how does that work?
Yeah, so you can go to our website, oova.life, and order your first kit. It comes with everything you need to get started, the handle, holder, and 15 cartridges. The app is free, so you can download that. And then you can choose to sign up for a subscription or a one-time purchase if you want to just try us out. You can always sign up for a subscription later on, and that's all available on our website.
And then they can just, if they don't do a subscription, they can just order it as they need, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
And just so people know, this is not a sponsored episode. It really is. Amy and I have spoke a year ago about this product, and it is actually something that I found to be really beneficial because a lot of people don't really understand if they're ovulating. A lot of people don't feel like taking their temperature every day. And obviously temping is great. It's just not everybody is up to doing that, and people still want to know and find out what's going on and what their levels look like. So it is something that is beneficial to be able to at least get to know your body and see how things are fluctuating.
Exactly. That's what I'm loving about our platform and what the feedback that we're getting from our users, because it's really empowering. I felt like when I was taking my body temperature, like, yes, like there's a pattern you're trying to detect, but it was so mania driving for me because I had to have that thermometer, and I was traveling a lot. It was obviously pre-COVID. Yeah. I was traveling a lot, and I had to make sure, like, forget clothes, underwear, all that. That thermometer better be in my bag and better be safe.
Yeah.
And it was just a very stressful thing to do every single morning because I was waking myself up at 4:30, no matter what day of the week it was. And what we've noticed with Oova is that because you're getting your hormone levels and the patterns, and you're also speaking with your doctor directly, it's just enabled women to be more empowered about their health. So now when you speak with your doctor, it's not like your doctor's just talking to you and saying like, oh, this is what you have to do. This is your problem. This is how I'm diagnosing you. It's more like, okay, I hear everything you're saying. How does that information relate to my Oova data, which is saying my hormones are behaving this way? Mm-hmm. And now you're having a conversation. You've actually made this a two-way conversation instead of it being one way. And to me, that's a huge benefit to women.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually advocate for yourself.
And how long does it take for that algorithm to really take root, really? Because if people have their cycles all over the place, which is what I used to have when I was younger, like what algorithm doesn't know? How can it predict that?
Sure. So because there's two layers to it, right? There's one where we look at each cycle individually, and then we look at your fertility profile as a whole. So for each cycle individually, we're capturing what your baseline levels are. And now I will be honest, people's baselines shift cycle to cycle as well.
Yeah.
We're so different. We're not robots.
Right.
And there's no way to, like, if you sort of force a woman to being into a certain model, she's going to break that in the next cycle.
Yeah.
You don't do that at all.
Okay.
We detect your ovulation status and everything for each specific cycle. Mm-hmm. So we relearn your baseline every single cycle, but that all informs what your overall fertility profile is. So when we're starting to make these recommendations and we're really evaluating like predictions on when you're going to be ovulating next cycle and just the learnings that we're getting about you, that's where multiple cycles start really compounding. But when it comes to detecting whether you're ovulating or not, that's all within each cycle. So we're accurate from cycle 1.
So how does it know to tell you when to start testing if it doesn't know more or less when you're going to ovulate?
It's all learning from each cycle, because we can understand from your hormone levels. Like, okay, so I'll give you one example. Let's say a woman logs in when she's registering that she has PCOS, mm-hmm. and she says that her cycle is 35 days long, mm-hmm. right? So something very, very extended. We will make a prediction early on, like, okay, this is when you should start scanning. She can override it. She can shift her scanning window if she feels that she should be scanning sooner, and we allow her to do that. Okay. We're also very dependent on her entering her period. So now if her period is prolonged, we shift accordingly, mm-hmm. right? And all that information is really helping us learn. So like if she starts scanning sooner or later than what we recommend, we start shifting our algorithm further and further, depending on what information she's providing to us. So it's a very iterative process. We don't wait until one whole cycle is over to modify our algorithm. It's happening with every piece of information that's being entered. It's very dynamic.
Are there certain times of the day that it's preferred to do the test?
I say you should use it first thing in the morning, but that's really only because I want you to use it around the same time for all 15 days.
Right.
And it's just easier to remember to do it first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
But if you prefer to do it in the afternoon, many of our users feel like their LH actually spikes in the afternoon. Mm-hmm. I'm like, fine, test then, but just make sure it's around the same time all 15 days, and it's just fine.
Right. And then my other question is, do you see anything? I know that you say it's all individual, and that's absolutely true. Everybody is like so unique. But do you guys utilize that information for your own studies or observation?
We're starting to. So, there's a lot of interesting findings that we're seeing. Mm-hmm. What I love is how diverse we all are. We even allow, and I don't know, Michelle, you've seen this in the dashboard, we allow women or you guys to actually overlay the normal trend mm-hmm. on top of your patient's data. And I believe women can do that in the report as well. We see very few women that actually fit that trend. Mm-hmm. Majority of our patients are all very different from that.
Yeah.
And so what I'm really excited to do is actually redefine that normal curve.
Right.
And we're getting the data to do that.
Oh, that's
what we're striving to do right now.
Yeah,
we really want to redefine normal.
Definitely. And when you talk about doctors, it could be naturopaths, it could be acupuncturists, it could be, it doesn't have to be an MD. It could be really any practitioner with a license that has a nutritionist as well that can access the data for their patients or clients.
Exactly, yeah. So we have the whole gamut. We have some of the leading fertility clinics. We have OBGYNs, naturopaths, integrated medicine doctors, acupuncturists, really anyone. we're in over 85 clinics across the country, and that's growing regularly. Like it's really making an impact on the fertility space, which is really exciting to me, because now I feel like we're actually making a difference for women who are struggling. Like this shouldn't be such a devastating experience. And I hope that Oova is actually helping you take control of your journey again.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. I mean, the fact that people don't have to, it's not a guessing game and they can actually figure out in real time what's going on is huge, which is why I thought it would be definitely an important topic to bring up on the podcast. You know, that by itself is huge because a lot of people, like I said, and you had mentioned, they get stressed out from just temping. Although temping's great. If you could do it, do it. But not everybody can afford to do that timing, like as far as their time wise and their schedules, and sometimes people actually start to get irregular with their cycle from the stress. So
that's what I felt like I was doing. Like I thought that I was making the situation worse for myself by trying to remember to temp every morning. But what's also interesting is that in our clinician dashboard, we actually allow you to overlay the BBT measurements on top of the hormone data.
Yeah.
And so,
that's interesting.
I believe you guys are a lot more trained at reading BBT charts than I am. Like to me, it's just
I actually love it when I have people who do the BBT, and some people love it. If you love it, awesome. You know.
To me, like, it didn't make much sense to me, but I do think that like I've seen magic happen from clinicians who actually know how to read BBT charts and seeing what conclusions they can draw from it. It's really amazing. But in my what I've learned is that BBT is also just a symptom of the way that our hormones are behaving. It's a reaction to the way the hormones are behaving in that cycle. So if we can get down to the root, that's a lot more informative than just looking at one symptom.
So overlay meaning, so whatever the hormones are, and then seeing that it matches up. But it should typically, it should match up.
It should. But what we've seen is for women who have irregular cycles, the BBT has not been as informative or as indicative.
Right.
But maybe I don't know how to read it properly. Clinicians are using it as they feel. And then I wanted to give that feature to our clinicians who did ask for it. And we're always trying to iterate and evolve and grow to what you all need.
Absolutely. And then is there a pattern that you see specifically with endometriosis or PCOS just in your own records or your own findings?
There's some. I mean, yes, there are patterns, but I can't say that it's like, oh, if you have PCOS, this is the pattern you're going to see, because what we're noticing is there are a lot of subtypes of all of these diseases, which we all we expected, right?
Yeah.
So what I'm super excited about is that there's this misnomer that if you have PCOS, you have elevated LH. That's not necessarily the case.
Right.
I shouldn't even say that. That's a hypothesis I have, because what I could also argue is that maybe these women who are saying they have PCOS are actually being misdiagnosed.
Right. That's a good point. Very good point.
So it's hard to make any solid claims like these are the trends that are associated with so-and-so reproductive disorder, because there's so many other factors. And I think for both endometriosis and PCOS, there's a lot of misdiagnosis happening. So what's exciting from our clinician side, and I've gotten feedback a lot, is they're able to start tease out various things that they're noticing in their patients to help with proper diagnosis and proper treatment.
So how were you misdiagnosed with PCOS? That's interesting. It's good for people to hear.
Absolutely. It's a very frustrating time. So I'm happy to share that. So like I mentioned earlier, I've had irregular cycles my whole life. So when I started my first period, it was irregular from that point on. And I got my period when I was 13.
Irregular meaning what?
So early on, after my first period, it would be every 40, 45 days, 60 days, it would change between that. But it would become so heavy at times, I would become anemic. So every cycle, I was missing 3 to 4 days of school. And after a certain point, you can't miss school. And I was struggling a lot, right? So as a 13-year-old, the doctor's like, well, you can put on birth control. And I'm an Indian first generation child in the US. My mom was like, absolutely not. She can't be on birth control. So that wasn't an option. So I basically had to deal with all that pain, but I had that my whole life. So I became immune to it to an extent. Then I go to college, and I was a pre-med student. At my last year, like I said, my entire last 2 months of college in the library studying, I gained some weight. I had adult acne. I had excess facial hair because I'm Indian. And I went to my OB for my regular checkup, and they diagnosed me with PCOS right there from that persona, and because I had irregular cycles. So they put me on metformin. I was put on a birth control pill at that point, and I basically had every side effect associated with both those medications. I became extremely anemic because I was bleeding for about a month and a half straight from the birth control pills. I was incredibly depressed. I'm a very happy, energetic person. All of a sudden, it was such a struggle to get out of bed. I didn't want to go to work, and I had an amazing job out of college. I just didn't want to go. I mean, it was just a really bad period. So 3 years later, I go to a new doctor, and on my intake form, I said I had PCOS. And at that point, I mean, I had lost the weight, I had cleaned up, like I was back to myself, right? And I said, like, she's going over, she's like, why do you think you have PCOS? And I was like, because I was diagnosed with this 3 years ago. And she's like, why are you on metformin? Why are you on all these things? Because my blood work came back normal. And she's like, you don't have PCOS. Get off the metformin, get off of the birth control pills if you're not comfortable with it. And like, let's figure out what's going on. And then it came out, you just have irregular cycles.
Oh, wow.
So when I was going through my infertility journey, man, the curses I gave to myself for being on metformin for 3 years and being on those pills for 3 years when I didn't have to be, it was horrible.
Yeah, I bet. But a lot of people are going through that. And I mean, so many people, even more countless of women are being put on the birth control pill for irregular periods or any kind of period issues and conditions, myself being one of the people. I had gone through it too. I mean, there's so many people like that happened to me, you know, and whether it's pain or cramps, irregular cycles, heavy bleeding, you name it. People get put on the birth control pill. And the reason why we have a birth control pill is to control birth, not control periods.
Exactly. It's so crazy to me. But, you know, it's kind of like that's a pretty good like statue of how women's health is treated. It's like, all right, we check the box, we have a solution, it's done. It's not actually a solution, and it's not actually making a difference, but you check the box, so you don't have to worry about that problem anymore.
Right. Absolutely. And it is nice to, you know, when you think about all these hormones that you're testing, it sounds like, so, oh my God, these different hormones, what are they? You know, for somebody who's never heard of them, but it's actually not hard to understand. I think a lot of people going through the fertility journey eventually know so much about their hormones that they can like be professionals. But it really is empowering to learn about your body and what things mean, because that is something that's always brushed off, and it's not something that people think, or, you know, professionals think to teach women.
Oh yeah. I mean, like, okay, so I was a pre-med student, but to be honest, I knew nothing about my fertility until I was trying to conceive. I taught myself what LH was. I taught myself why progesterone was important. I taught myself what the menstrual cycle actually means. We're not taught that information. And I think a lot of women like get very frustrated with themselves. Why don't I know about my body?
Right.
But like, why
and it feels
would
so
you?
foreign. It feels like so removed, but it's not hard once you learn about it. It's actually very easy and natural.
But what really angers me is that the only way to learn it is to teach it to yourself, and that should not be the case.
You're right. Absolutely. Amen to that. They need to like start teaching them for real at schools. I mean, and I do that with my daughters, but I know that just because I do what I do, I'm able to teach them, but people don't, nobody knows, and the schools don't really teach it. So, and that's really ultimately where girls learn.
Well, I love that there's now like this active movement to modify what sex ed actually is. It's not about learning how to put a condom on a banana. There's a lot more for our reproductive health, right?
Absolutely.
Don't call it sex health. Call it reproductive health.
Right.
That already changes the tone of the conversation.
100%. Totally. I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I do like that I am seeing is with the apps, at least people know or mark when they're getting their period, so they know what their cycle is, which was not the case when I was younger. But you know, we didn't have smartphones back then either. But that it is nice to know that they're actually paying attention to those things a little bit more. So hopefully we'll go on a much nicer path, much more understanding path of teaching girls what it means to be menstruating and what it means, what the whole cycle means. And it's not just about the bleed.
Yeah, exactly. And even the bleed is meaningful,
Yeah.
right? It's not something to be stigmatized or ashamed of or hide. Like, accidents happen. Guys need to not laugh at that. Women need to not be embarrassed and just embrace it. Like, it shouldn't be a stigmatized experience. I think, like, to be quite honest, I don't think it could get any worse. So it's only going up from here.
Yes, that's a good point. That's a good point. Well, Amy, thank you so much for coming on. This was really, really helpful. I'm sure a lot of people will take away a lot from this. So I understand that you're going to be giving a discount to the listeners today.
Yeah, I would love to. So if you use the code WHOLESOME, you can get 15% off of your order. Go ahead to our website, oova.life, and you can just enter that at checkout and it'll be applied.
Awesome. So I'm going to add that into the episode notes so that people know.
Okay.
And you can always go back and check. So it's all capital, right?
All capital. It doesn't matter. It'll work both ways.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Amy, thank you so much for coming on today. And also, how can people find you guys? How can people find on the different avenues that you guys have?
Yeah, sure. So our website's always a great place to reach out to us. That's www.oova.life. Or on social, we're available at Oova Life, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever. And then if anyone has any specific questions, they can feel free to reach out to me as well. I'm available at amy@oova.life.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy, for coming on today.
Thanks so much, Michelle. It was wonderful speaking with you.
So that concludes today's episode. You can find all of the links mentioned on the episode notes. If you're enjoying these episodes, please take a moment to share and leave a review. Reviews mean everything to podcasters, and I really enjoy hearing from my listeners. You can also find me on my website at www.thewholesomelotus.com or email me at info@thewholesomelotus.com. I love hearing from my listeners. If you're interested and want updates as well as a free ebook on my top 10 fertility boosting habits, you can visit my fertility page on www.thewholesomelotus.com. I thank you so much for listening in and hope that you have a beautiful day.